Zara, a single mother, sat in her dark room, her eyes tired but full of determination. She looked at the photo of her son, Aman, the child she had devoted her entire life to protecting. Although she loved her son more than anything in the world, she now faced a choice that no one in her life had ever imagined. She was exhausted, worn out, and didn't know what else to do. Her son needed a future, and she knew that if she didn't do something, the boy would continue living in poverty and deprivation. One late afternoon in a dimly lit room, Zara received an invitation to participate in an auction unlike anything she had ever heard of before. This was not a typical auction of items, but an auction for women who could sell their bodies. She didn't want to take part, but she knew this was the only chance she had to earn enough money to raise Aman and give him a better life. She had no other choice. The auction took place in a luxurious setting, where all the attendees were wealthy individuals who could buy anything they wanted. Zara, a poor single woman, felt like an animal in a cold and heartless bidding war. She was not an object, but the only thing she had to offer was her body, her ability to give a man the heir he needed. As the auction began, Zara felt like an outsider, someone who could never belong in this world. But then, a man appeared, someone she never expected would become such an important part of her life. Karim Alfid, an Arab billionaire, was the one who bought her for $1 million. It was not a decision made out of love, but because he needed a woman to bear an heir for his family. That was the only reason he paid such a large amount. Karim looked at her as someone fulfilling a duty, not as a woman who deserved respect. Zara felt imprisoned the moment she stepped into his life. He required her to sign a contract not only to carry and give birth to a child, but to leave forever once it was over. She knew her life would never be the same. She had lost her freedom, her right to choose, but all she could do was accept it. No one knew, but Zara was hiding a big secret. She already had a son named Aman. This was a part of her life she didn't want anyone to know about, didn't want anyone to suspect. When she entered this auction, she had accepted to sacrifice not only herself, but also the bond between mother and child that she had nurtured for so many years. Zara was carrying a heavy burden, a vow to protect her son and do whatever it took to give him a future. This auction was not just about money, but about what she had to give up. Zara couldn't turn back, and now she was trapped in a contract she couldn't escape. No one knew that behind this act was a mother's overwhelming love. Zara had done everything for Aman, for a child she couldn't let grow up in poverty. But was the price she had to pay worth it? She didn't know, only that this was the only chance she had to give her son a life she could never provide on her own. Zara entered Karim's mansion like a newly arrived prisoner, with no choice, no voice. The pristine white walls, the luxurious furniture, and the vast space made her feel small and lost within the very house she now lived in. This wasn't her home. It was merely the place where she was being held. Every morning when she woke up, she saw those cold, emotionless walls, no familiar faces, and none of the freedom she had once longed for. Karim didn't see her as a person, but as a tool, a task executor. Their relationship was not an emotional bond, but a bond forged by a contract. She wasn't a wife, nor a partner. She was merely a woman tasked with giving him an heir. With each passing day, Zara felt the weight of loneliness grow heavier. Though this mansion could give her everything material, it lacked the most essential things: affection, empathy, and care. Karim treated her like a servant. He was cold, rarely spoke, and only demanded that she fulfill her duty. She was allowed to eat and rest, but only within the boundaries set for her. There was no freedom, no opportunity to connect. Everything within the mansion was under his control. Zara felt as though she were being controlled, like a puppet in the hands of a powerful man. Every day passed in silence, afraid to express her emotions, afraid to call for help. She missed her son, Aman, more than ever. The longing swelled within her, but she couldn't voice it. She couldn't share her sorrow, couldn't call home or see her child. At night, lying in the mansion's grand bed, all she could do was cling to her memories of Aman. The long nights, eerily silent, were filled only with the sound of wind whistling past the windows and the suffocating loneliness. These moments tightened her chest like a wound that would never heal. She wished she could go back to her old life, where at least she could see Aman, hold him in her arms, and whisper that everything would be okay. With each passing day, she felt the separation between herself and the world grow clearer. The unfamiliarity came not only from the mansion, but from the very man she was forced to live with. Karim was a man full of power, but within him, Zara felt only coldness and an invisible wall. He had no regard for her emotions, only for the terms of the contract and the child she was expected to bear for him. Every word, every action from him served only one purpose: to fulfill the task, and Zara was merely a part of that power play. Sometimes, she wondered if she could endure this life much longer. Could she live like this forever? A life steeped in loneliness and disconnection, but there was no other choice. Zara knew that if she left, Aman's life would plunge back into poverty. She had chosen this path, and now she couldn't turn back. This sacrifice was all she could do for her son. But could she live with herself like this for the long haul? Day after day, week after week passed, and Zara felt her heart slowly being imprisoned, not by material deprivation, but by the absence of emotion and empathy. She lived in a world of coldness, with no one to share her joys or sorrows. The long days passed without voices, without connection, only the crushing weight of loneliness in every moment. All she had were memories of Aman and the faint hope of a better future. On quiet nights, when everyone else was asleep, Zara was left alone with her endless thoughts. She thought about her son, about everything she had gone through to raise Aman, and about what she had to sacrifice to give him a future. She knew she couldn't go back, couldn't change the past, but she also understood that even if she had to live through long, lonely nights, she still had one goal: to protect Aman, no matter the cost. These thoughts never left Zara's mind. Though she lived in a luxurious mansion with every material comfort, her heart remained imprisoned, still lacking the most important thing: connection, love, and understanding. This mansion could give her everything, but it could not give her the most vital thing: peace of soul. Throughout this time, Zara could not find empathy from Karim. She felt he always kept a wide distance, never letting anyone get close to his heart. Although he behaved coldly and seemed indifferent to her emotions, there were moments when Zara caught him looking at her with a distant gaze, as if he too were facing his own inner turmoil. But those moments were fleeting, quickly vanishing when he turned away. Zara couldn't speak it aloud, but she felt that beneath Karim's cold exterior was a deeply wounded person, just like herself. And so each day passed, with Zara continuing to live in Karim's mansion like a silent prisoner. She had no control over her own life, but she had one unwavering goal: her son. Even if it meant living in loneliness and pain, she held tightly to her determination, continuing the duty she had accepted. With each passing day, the loneliness became more evident, but Zara endured. She knew that no matter what the future held, she would protect Aman. That was all she could do for her son. Time passed in silence within the luxurious mansion, but it did not pass in Zara's mind. She had grown used to a life of loneliness, but she couldn't ignore the shift gradually taking place in the air. Long days in that cold, distant mansion, where separation always prevailed, were also the moments when Karim began to change, slowly revealing the hidden wounds in his heart that he had long kept buried. At first, Zara saw only a powerful, cold, and stern man. Kareem always kept his distance, treating her merely as someone fulfilling a task, without any concern for her emotions. But gradually, in the moments when Zara could observe him from afar, she began to notice changes. He was no longer the icy billionaire she had met when she entered his life. He was no longer just a man with eyes full of authority and severity. Instead, she saw a lonely man, someone trying to confront the deep wounds in his soul, wounds he had concealed for many years. Kareem seemed no longer to be living inside the shell of wealth and power. Zara noticed him watering the plants his mother once loved and cared for. These plants weren't just decorative greenery, they were a part of his memory, a piece of the mother he had lost at a very young age. That sight suddenly stirred Zara's heart. She hadn't expected that behind the cold, distant facade, he could have such touching moments that only someone who had endured pain could truly understand. Zara saw Kareem tending the plants as though he were nurturing old memories, trying to reconnect with a part of his past that he had lost. She saw him playing the piano, something she never imagined a man of such power would do. His fingers glided gently over the keys, producing melodies that were sorrowful yet full of grace. These sounds were more than just music. They were the voice of a man who had lived in loneliness, in the harsh shadow of a strict father, deprived of a mother's love. She had never thought a man like Kareem could express emotions through music, through such simple yet heartfelt actions. She saw in him not just the man she had to live with because of a contract, but a real human being, scarred and longing to be healed. Each time he watered the plants, each time he played the piano, Zara seemed to understand him more. He wasn't a man who lived only for power and wealth. He had pains he couldn't share with anyone. These small acts from Kareem gradually changed Zara's heart. She no longer saw him as a cold man, driven solely by his goals, but as someone full of wounds and a longing for connection. She began to realize that even with all his power and wealth, he was just like her, a person who needed love, who needed understanding, someone who needed someone to share the pain within. Zara began to see Kareem differently. Each time he quietly watered the plants, each time he sat down at the piano, she felt closer to him, as if an invisible thread was gradually connecting them. Even though neither of them said anything, they could both feel the changes in one another. She no longer looked at him as a woman forced into a task, but as someone who saw the pain in his heart. Those small gestures weren't superficial signs of concern, but the signs of a man trying to change, trying to live true to himself. Though this change was small, Zara knew that each day, each gesture, each moment was a step forward in the relationship between her and Kareem. She realized that without these changes, without such heartfelt actions, perhaps she and Kareem would never have truly connected. His coldness gradually melted away, replaced by openness, empathy, and a piece of emotion he had never dared show her before. Zara no longer felt like a woman imprisoned in a life full of injustice. Even though she was still not completely free, the change in Kareem made her feel that they were slowly heading toward a place where both could understand each other, could share their pain and wounds. And this warmed her heart, even though she knew the road ahead would still be long and full of challenges. Every day, in the luxurious yet cold space of the mansion, Zara gradually realized that even though her life would never be the same, she could find hope in the small things, in the loving gestures Kareem was slowly beginning to show. Actions that once seemed ordinary, like watering plants or playing the piano, became expressions of care, signs of a man trying to reconnect with the true values of life. And during this time, Zara realized that it wasn't just she who needed healing. Kareem did too. They both needed each other to overcome the pain and loneliness that life had given them. And that was the first step toward building a relationship not based solely on a contract, but on understanding and love. Kareem had just finished a long day filled with tense meetings and difficult decisions. But when he returned to the mansion one afternoon, he never expected an entirely different situation would be waiting for him. He was searching through an empty room, looking for an important document he had forgotten. when suddenly his eyes landed on an old photograph placed on a wooden table beside some insignificant papers. He picked up the photo and looked at it closely. It was a picture of a young boy, not a stranger, but a child he had never seen before, and yet there was a strange connection to Zara. The photo made Kareem's heart pound. How could a woman like Zara keep something like this from him? The child in the photo looked into his eyes as if seeing straight into him. There was no doubt. The boy had eyes identical to Zara's. A boy Kareem had never heard Zara mention. A child he couldn't even imagine existed in her life. Rage began to build inside him. He immediately turned, grabbed the photo, and stormed out of the room, looking for Zara. His heart beat fast, not from surprise, but from a deep sense of betrayal. The unanswered questions flooded his mind. Why had Zara hidden this child from him? Why hadn't she told him about Aman, her son, when they had lived under the same roof for so long? He couldn't stand the silence any longer. He needed answers. Kareem entered Zara's room with a cold determination. He didn't say a word, simply held the photograph in front of her. Zara looked up, her eyes red from exhaustion and worry. She couldn't escape Kareem's furious gaze. They stood face to face, wordless, the tension between them thick. Kareem finally broke the silence with an icy voice. "Why did you hide this from me?" Zara felt her heart tighten as she looked into his furious eyes. She had always known that one day, this truth would have to come out. But not now, not like this. She took a step back, feeling dizzy. From the moment she entered this mansion, she had decided to hide the greatest secret of her life, her son, Aman. As much as she loved the boy, she couldn't let Kareem know about him. She knew that if he found out, everything would change forever. Zara could no longer stay silent. The words burst out through her tears. "I did this for my son because he went to sleep hungry so many nights." She couldn't hold back the pain any longer. A mother, when pushed to the edge, will do anything to protect her child. The months of poverty and despair had changed her. She sold her body to Kareem, not for money, but for Aman's survival. She had to provide for her son with everything she had, even if it meant sacrificing herself. She looked at Kareem with eyes full of torment. "I couldn't let my son grow up in poverty," Zara continued, each word a deep wound in her heart. "I did it all for him. I needed money to give him a better life. I didn't want him to grow up like me, with nothing but pain." Kareem stood there, staring at her, not knowing what to say. He was too shocked by the truth. Everything he had thought about her, the image he had built, of a woman he considered merely a tool to bear his child, collapsed completely. He couldn't believe she had hidden such a massive secret from him. Yet at the same time, he felt something strange, something he had never felt before. He felt pity for her, but also a deep respect for her sacrifice and the courage she had shown. Step by step, Kareem began to understand that Zara's story wasn't just about a contract. She wasn't merely a woman forced to fulfill a task. She was a mother who had given up everything for her son. To raise Aman, she endured pain, loneliness, and gave her all for the happiness of the child she loved most. Kareem felt like he was standing before a harsh truth, but one that opened a new door. He couldn't change what had happened, but he could change how he saw Zara, her emotions, and their relationship. From a man who saw her only as a tool, he began to see her as a real person, with feelings and suffering he had never considered. He didn't speak right away. His emotions were too intense to put into words. The questions, the anger, and the empathy all clashed inside him. But finally, he asked just one question. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Zara looked into his eyes, red but unwavering. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want you to see me as a woman who had lost everything," she said with a heavy sigh. The silence between them seemed to stretch forever. Finally, the tension began to ease. Tears quietly rolled down Zara's cheeks, not from fear or regret, but from a sense of relief. It had been so long since she had been able to share this burden with anyone. Her life had been so closed off, and she had carried this secret alone for so long. But now that everything had been revealed, Zara felt a part of herself had been set free. Karim stood silently, part of him confused, another part full of sympathy. He no longer saw Zara as merely a woman under contract, but as a mother who had done everything for her child. Her story had changed the way he saw life, and also changed how he saw himself. His own wounds, the pain from his past, were nothing compared to the sacrifices Zara had endured. Karim didn't yet know what he would do next, but one thing was certain. Everything had changed. Zara's story had touched a part of his heart he could no longer ignore. Zara could never forget that moment, the moment she was allowed to see her son again. Although everything had been kept secret, although the truth could not yet be revealed entirely, this was an opportunity she could not pass up. The weeks she had spent living in the mansion, completely separated from Aman, had tightened her heart a little more each day. Now, just being able to see her son, even once, made her feel alive again, made her feel like she could breathe once more. She couldn't hide her nervousness as she stepped into the small house where Aman was living with his grandmother. It wasn't the first time she had seen her child, but each meeting always felt like a nightmare. She knew she had to keep the secret, couldn't let Karim find out the truth, couldn't let her son realize that his mother and the man she was living with had a far more complicated relationship. But the love she had for Aman was impossible to hide. She held his hand, felt its warmth, and in that moment, time seemed to stop. Karim stood from afar, saying nothing, just watching a scene he had never imagined he would witness. The sight of Zara holding Aman tightly, her heart pounding as if there were no barrier between mother and son. Confronted with Zara's boundless love, a mother who had done everything to protect her child, Karim felt something shift within himself. He looked at Zara not just as the woman in a contract, but as a mother with a heart full of love and sacrifice. Karim didn't speak immediately. He stood silently, watching Zara and Aman in this emotional moment. Something inside him awakened. Whereas before he had seen Zara only as part of a transaction, a woman he needed to bear him an heir, now he began to see her as a real person, a person with pain, with sacrifices, with love for the only child in her life. He couldn't deny that he had been wrong to see her only as a tool. Zara turned to look at Karim, her eyes full of worry. She knew this wasn't the time to reveal the whole truth. As much as she wanted to share her feelings, she still couldn't, because doing so would only make things more complicated. She felt caught between two inevitable choices. One side was truth, the other was continuing the lie. But in that moment, with everything she had endured, Zara understood she couldn't change the past. Karim remained silent, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. It was as if he was beginning to understand something he had never thought about before. He had lived his entire life making cold decisions, always believing love and family could be controlled. But now, watching Zara and Aman, he started to realize that love couldn't be forced. It wasn't something that could be bought with money or power. Love, as he saw clearly in Zara's eyes, was incredibly precious, and only those who truly cherished it could understand its value. Karim walked closer, his eyes filled with complexity, no longer angry or resentful, but instead filled with empathy and understanding. He approached Zara and said in a calm yet thoughtful voice, "I understand. I understand why you did it." Those words were not just an acknowledgement, but an expression of compassion Karim had never shown Zara before. He no longer saw her as a contractual subject, but as a woman, a mother with genuine emotions. Zara felt a weight lift off her shoulders, hearing those words. She knew that, even though she couldn't tell him the full truth yet, at least he had begun to understand her, to understand the choices she had been forced to make. Though her life with him had never been easy, she also sensed a growing connection between them. It was a small step, but a meaningful one. After that visit, the change in Karim became evident. He was no longer the cold man who only cared about the contract's outcome. Instead, he began to respect Zara, to see her not just as a woman fulfilling a duty, but as a person with value. He began began to listen to her, began to realize she wasn't just a vessel to bear his child, but someone with feelings, desires, and pain he had never tried to understand. Karim gradually began to shift his perception of Zara. No longer was she just the woman bound by contract. She became someone he started to respect and care about. Though he still couldn't completely face all that had happened, at least he began to realize that love and family couldn't be forced. They required time, understanding, and most importantly, sincerity. In the days that followed, the relationship between Zara and Karim slowly began to build on a foundation of respect and empathy. They were no longer just two people beside each other for a purpose, but real human beings, with emotions, wounds, and hopes for a better future. Their feelings couldn't be built overnight, but the changes within their hearts were the first steps, signs of a new beginning. Zara realized that although the road ahead was still full of challenges, at least now she was no longer alone in this life. She could believe that Karim's transformation was real, that he had recognized the true values of life, and that they could begin a new journey, not just for the sake of their son, but for each other. Love doesn't always come from perfect beginnings, but with small efforts and steady steps. The relationship between Zara and Karim was slowly becoming a true story of understanding and genuine love. Time passed, and a quiet yet unmistakable transformation took place between Zara and Karim. Their relationship was no longer bound solely by duty. It gradually became a deep, undeniable connection. The long days spent in Karim's lavish mansion were filled with silent moments, lonely evenings where neither spoke a word. Yet from those small shifts, something began to bloom between them. One of the first moments that changed the dynamic between them was during their late-night tea sessions. She and he would sit together in the cozy room, warm tea in hand. These moments were more than just about drinking tea. They became slow, unpressured conversations where emotions were gradually shared. Zara spoke about her past, her difficult childhood, and what she had endured to raise Aman. Karim couldn't help but feel empathy. She told stories of her parents, of hungry nights and hardship, and of dreams she had to let go in order to care for her child. Each story softened Karim's heart, helping him see her not as a woman in a contract, but as someone full of strength and resilience. At night, when the breeze was gentle, they walked together through the vast garden of the mansion. The moonlight shimmered over the flowers, creating a peaceful and serene atmosphere. Zara no longer felt so lost, because each step she took in the garden was now shared with Karim. They didn't need to speak much, but their presence beside one another made them feel closer than ever. Karim began to understand that, in the simplest of moments when stripped of power and obligation, they could truly connect. Zara no longer felt anxious or burdened by the constraints she once endured. Their relationship was no longer a duty or a power play. The evening strolls, the late-night tea, became moments where she and Karim looked at each other as friends, as soulmates, not because they were forced to be together, but because they were beginning to truly understand and see one another as they never had before. Karim, though still outwardly composed and reserved, couldn't deny that he was changing. He realized that their bond wasn't forged through contracts or terms, but through the simplest things: acts of care, attentive listening, and deep understanding. Those late-night teas helped him realize that love could never be forced. It required time, sharing, and mutual acceptance. He couldn't continue living a cold life filled only with power and wealth, without someone to truly share it with, without a heart beside his own. To reflect this change, Karim decided to revise the contract he had made with Zara. No more rigid clauses, no more strict conditions requiring her to bear a child and then leave. Instead, he granted Zara the right to contact Aman, and more importantly, he gave her the freedom to choose her future. No more binding terms, only Zara's own choice. And that was a monumental shift in the way he viewed her. He no longer saw her as a piece in a plan. but as a woman who had the right to decide her own life. Zara recognized this change, and her heart began to shift as well. The freedom Karim offered made her feel a deep relief. She no longer had to live under complete control, but could now think about her own future, what she wanted to do next. These changes weren't just gifts Karim gave her. They were signs that he now deeply understood and respected her. No longer was he the man who saw her only as a means to have a child. He had become someone who understood the value of love, choice, and freedom. Karim slowly began to express emotions he had never dared to admit before. One evening, as they sat together, he unexpectedly looked into Zara's eyes and spoke with a calm yet tender voice. "I want you to stay, not out of obligation, but because we choose each other." Those words marked a complete shift in their relationship. No more orders, no more binding terms, only mutual choice. Karim wanted Zara to stay not because of a contract or responsibility, but because he truly wanted her by his side. It was a major turning point in their bond, and a defining moment in Zara's heart. Those words were not just a confession from Karim. They were a declaration that they were no longer strangers, but two people who had begun building a real relationship. What connected them now was not duty or agreement, but mutual choice and respect. They were no longer in each other's lives because of circumstance, but because they truly wanted to be. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Zara and Karim knew they had found a new beginning, one no one could have anticipated. Their relationship was never something easy, but the small steps they took had nurtured a love that grew quietly. A love that didn't need to rush, that didn't need urgency, only patience and understanding. This love wasn't something that could be forced, but a bond born from small gestures, genuine care, and mutual respect. In those late-night teas, in their walks through the garden, Zara began to see Karim not as the cold man he once was, but as someone who could listen, who could share, and, most importantly, someone who valued true feelings. Karim also no longer saw Zara as a task-bearer, but as a woman of value, with pain and sacrifices he had never understood until now. They had gradually become soulmates, not strangers in each other's lives, but people who truly wished to stay beside one another forever. In the middle of the night, Zara suddenly felt a sharp pain strike her, waking her in a wave of overwhelming worry. This pain was unlike the usual discomfort she had experienced throughout her pregnancy. Everything quickly turned tense. Zara's heart pounded. She felt cold sweat run down her back. She looked toward Karim, who was sleeping nearby. He was a man known for his coldness and resilience, but even he could not ignore the danger in this moment. Zara bit her lip gently, trying to suppress the fear rising within her. She didn't want to show weakness, didn't want to worry him, but as the contractions grew stronger, she couldn't help but fear for the child. The son she had carried through months of pain and sacrifice. The child she had always dreamed would be born healthy, would have a bright future. All of Zara's fears and emotions erupted as she realized her child was coming, and nothing else mattered now. Karim awoke to see Zara in pain, her forehead drenched in sweat. Looking into her frightened eyes, his heart shattered. He couldn't leave her alone in this moment. He immediately lifted her into his arms, rushing her to the hospital in complete panic. Everything around them became a blur. There was only Zara, the pain, and the child about to be born. On the way to the hospital, the air between them was thick with tension and dread. Karim drove, his hands trembling as they gripped the steering wheel. He didn't know what to do. Didn't know if he had enough time to get Zara to safety. Each time he saw her in pain, he felt helpless. But in the midst of his panic, he realized he had to be stronger than ever. He couldn't let Zara, the woman he had come to understand and love, face this pain alone. When they arrived at the hospital, everything unfolded like a nightmare. Zara was rushed into the delivery room, and Karim could do nothing but stand outside the door, waiting. The anxiety inside him grew with every passing minute. He stood silently, unable to sit, unable to do anything. Every minute that passed was filled with the fear that something might go wrong, something he couldn't stop. He thought of Zara, of their child, the child he had never expected to mean so much to him. When the baby's first cry rang out, an emotion Kareem had never felt before surged in his chest. It was the cry of the son they had been waiting for together. Though just a small sound, to him, it felt like a binding vow that could never be broken. What once began as a contract, a commitment on paper, had now transformed into something real. He couldn't hold back his emotions. Standing outside the delivery room, hearing the cry of his child, every wall he had built over the years crumbled. He was no longer just a man driven by power and wealth. He was a father, a real man, with a family beginning to take shape. As soon as Zara was wheeled out of the delivery room, Kareem rushed to her side. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but also joy and deep happiness. Zara looked at him, her gaze saying everything she had endured. She gave a faint smile when she saw Kareem, and in that moment, all the tension and worry seemed to melt away. Nothing else mattered, just the two of them and their newborn child. Kareem stood by her bedside, tightly holding Zara's hand in his. He said nothing, just stood there, looking at their son, at what was now a reality, no longer a distant concept or a clause in a contract. He felt the shift, the connection between them. What had once been an agreement was now a true relationship. This was no longer a transaction, but love and sacrifice. He loved Zara, and he loved the child they had brought into the world together. Everything in the past, the cold relationships, the lifeless negotiations, no longer mattered. These moments were all he needed. The feeling of becoming a father for the first time was sacred and overwhelming. He bent down and gently embraced Zara, looking at the tiny baby in her arms. Seeing his son, he couldn't help but cry. This was a moment he had never imagined he would have. This was the moment he realized that true love could not be bought with money. It had to be given from the heart. Zara, too, felt the change in him. She didn't need to say anything, didn't need to ask. The feelings in their hearts had been reborn, and the child they had brought into the world had become an unforgettable mark in both of their lives. Their love wasn't something that could be rushed, but this child had created a powerful, unbreakable bond. They were no longer just two people together for some reason. They were people capable of building a real family, one no longer bound by contracts or agreements. Kareem looked into the eyes of their son, and in that moment, he understood that he already had everything he needed. Not power, not wealth, but family. He looked at Zara and whispered, "We did it. We have a family now." Zara smiled, her eyes filled with happiness and peace. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment they were no longer strangers, but a family. Now, they no longer had to live for a contract or any other purpose. Their relationship had truly changed, and this family had been formed, stronger than ever. What had once been a commitment was now a genuine love, and their son was the living proof of it. Everything in Zara and Kareem's lives changed completely after the child was born. The challenges, the pain, and the sacrifices they had endured had now led them to a place neither of them could have imagined. What was once a cold, emotionless contract had transformed into a deep love, a connection that could no longer be denied. But even though their relationship had evolved, there was still one thing left unresolved, something Kareem knew he had to do to free them both completely from the chains of the past. Kareem stood before Zara in the grand room of the mansion, his heart pounding. Today was the day he had long awaited. A day not just to speak words he had never dared to admit, but to end all the old bindings once and for all. He looked at Zara, the woman who had changed his entire life. Her eyes reflected relief, but also a hint of uncertainty. She didn't know what was coming next, but she could feel this was an important moment. He tore up the contract in front of Zara, the very contract they had signed in the beginning, the contract that had once defined everything between them. It no longer mattered. It had been a symbol of obligation. of conditions and control that he no longer wanted. His words echoed through the stillness of the room. "I don't want any paper to define our future." These weren't just words. They were a real commitment, a transformation from within his heart. Zara stood there, eyes wide, surprised and moved. Everything she had endured, everything she had felt while living in that mansion, was finally released. Kareem had not only torn up the contract, he had also torn down the walls, the misunderstandings, and the unnecessary constraints. He accepted her not because of the child she bore, but because of her heart, her sacrifice, and the love she had given to him and the baby. But that wasn't all. Kareem knelt before Zara, took her hand, and presented her with a delicate ring. A ring he had prepared long ago. He said nothing at first, simply looked into her eyes, full of emotion and hope. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled with sincerity. "Zara, you're the only one I want by my side, not because of a contract, but because I love you. I don't want any paper to define our future. I just want us together, with nothing but love and our own choice." Zara stood in silence, unable to believe what she had just heard. The difficult days, the lonely nights spent in that mansion, the moments she questioned whether she could ever truly receive Kareem's love. Now it all felt like it had been answered. She no longer had to live in chains. She no longer had to wonder if she could have a life of freedom and happiness. As Kareem knelt before her, she felt the truth. He had truly changed. He was no longer the man who had bought her as a means to have a child. He was a man who loved her and wanted her by his side for life. Emotion overwhelmed Zara. She couldn't hold back her tears. This was the moment she had dreamed of. The pain, the sacrifices, the things she had done for her son, all of it had led to this moment. She bent down and embraced Kareem, saying nothing, just feeling the warmth and sincerity he offered. She knew that no matter what challenges might come, they would face them together. The next day, their wedding took place, a beautiful fusion of two cultures. Despite vast differences in traditions and customs, Zara and Kareem both felt that this wedding was the union of two worlds. From the elegant solemnity of the traditional Arab ceremony to the gentle yet meaningful rituals from Zara's homeland, they created a wedding that was not only a legal union, but a true connection of hearts, of people who had overcome every obstacle to be together. Aman, now a joyful child with his newborn baby brother, ran happily among the guests. It was a perfect image of the family they had built. He was not only Zara's source of joy, but now, with his brother, he had become the shared happiness of the entire family. The two boys played, unaware that they were living in a love story, not one that began with freedom or romance, but one born from sacrifice, transformation, and genuine love. Kareem and Zara stood beneath a star-filled sky, hand in hand, exchanging vows. Nothing could separate them now. Nothing could undo what they had built together. Their vows were not just simple promises, but commitments to love, to family, and to a future they would walk through as one. It was an acknowledgement that love can be born from the most difficult beginnings, that love doesn't always start easy, but it grows through resilience, sacrifice, and hope. Their wedding was not merely a ceremony. It was the culmination of everything they had endured, everything they had given for each other. In that moment, Zara and Kareem, with their children, became a true family. Not strangers, not two people bound by a contract or control, but real people who had chosen each other. Under the starry sky, as Zara and Kareem exchanged their vows, they knew everything had changed forever. Their love would be the driving force to overcome all challenges ahead. This was not an ending, but the beginning of a new journey, one they would walk together, not only for their children, but for themselves, for the love they had found and nurtured. The story of Zara and Kareem has gone through a journey full of challenges, and now, all that remains is one big question. Can love overcome everything? Can love be born from a beginning filled with pain, from a transaction where Zara once had to trade everything, even herself. Zara, the woman who was once treated like an object in the hands of the wealthy, who had to live a life full of empty promises and cold contracts, is now facing true love. But can she forgive what happened in the past? She has lived too long with pain, with the feeling of betrayal. And now, as everything slowly begins to change, as Karim is no longer the cold man he once was, as he truly loves her, does Zara have enough strength to open her heart to accept that love? Their love has gone through many ups and downs. The relationship began as a contract, a transaction. But day by day, Karim's sincerity and transformation gradually began to heal the wounds in Zara's heart. She is no longer the woman imprisoned by agreements and conditions, but a woman who is loved and respected. However, her heart still carries the scars of the past. She still cannot fully open her heart, still cannot completely trust a love that started under such terms. The question is, if you were Zara, what would you do? Could you forgive the man who once bought you, even though he has changed and now truly loves you? Can love blossom from a relationship that began with pain and deceit? Or would you hold on to reason, keeping the walls around your heart to protect yourself from being hurt again? When everything becomes clear, when emotions begin to rise, can forgiveness be found? Or are there only wounds that never heal? Can love truly overcome everything? Or is reason the only thing you have left? The story of Zara and Karim is not just a love journey. It is also a lesson about forgiveness, about opening the heart and accepting love, no matter how painful the past may be. And in those moments, we must ask ourselves, can love really overcome all, or will we forever live in the shadows of reason and old wounds? We want to hear your opinion. If you were Zara, what would you do? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Leave your feelings and reflections on love and reason in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more heartwarming stories to come.